we are your fan and the Baumhout Center fan too. And I am confident that we are speaking to the future CEOs and board chairs of Fortune 500 companies, because the world is recognizing that the only way forward is, and the best business is when we take care of people, planet, and product chains. And my company, I'm going to give you a brief history, sort of our creation story, and then ask for your help updating this article, which we published last year. I'm putting it in the chat right now. It is the 20 leading corporations in the Chicago Bay Area and the United States demonstrating best CSR practices. Make It Better Media Group is comprised of 3 brands. One of them is Better. We are so honored to be the media sponsor. And when we published this article last year, I was delighted at the response it had. And if you Google best CSR, best corporate social responsibility, you will see that it's still in the top results, and that we cite many references, resources like CSR Hub and Wharton and several others. What we want going forward is what you think best CSR practices is. And we also want you to tell us about your companies and how they demonstrate that. We are confident that you, this group, are creating the impact and the best businesses for the future, because millennials demand mission and meaning with every dollar and hour that they spend. And now there are headlines almost daily, like one I just saw, record-setting 81% of DuPont shareholders approve proposal calling for plastic pellet pollution reporting. A decade ago, no one could have imagined that DuPont shareholders would be demanding that. So we are going in the right direction as the world. Business is going in the right direction, and Baumhout Center and all of the amazing speakers coming that you cited are evidence of that. And I want to give you just a little bit of Make It Better Media Group started with 1 employee as a little website serving North Shore of Chicago mothers. And that was May 2007. And we had, with that 1 employee, an awesome mission to be the most trusted, easiest to use community resource that helps you make your life and the life of others better. And we called it Make It Better, and we did everything we did because 92% of those North Shore moms would change their brand loyalty if they thought it would make the world a better place. And then they raised the millennials, who are now driving all these trends. So fast forward, we are now multi-platform, national, we do events, we do this, and you're going to, I hope, help us update what best CSR looks like. I would love for you to put comments in the chat, but more importantly, follow up with us, send your email to me. Send it to Baumhout Center. Watch for, we are soon going to do, in addition to the follow-up content that shares best practices that have developed from this conference, we're going to update this article too. So thanks so much for the opportunity. Honored to be your media partner.
Well, thank you so much, Susan. And as someone who has admired your leadership for a long time, I'm really grateful for the chance to partner with you in this. And we are really grateful for the chance to now move into our conversation with Jacqueline Novogratz, who is the founder and CEO of Acumen. It will be moderated by a phenomenal faculty member and former member of the Acumen team, Megan Christensen. And before I turn it over to Megan, I just want to say, Jacqueline, that you have been such an inspiration to me. I had the joy of meeting you when I was very young and inexperienced and still learning, but had the privilege of being part of the Clinton Global Initiative. This was in 2006. I remember watching you up on stage, hearing your remarks about how we could use investing and how we could think differently about profit. And then a couple of years later, seeing your blue sweater come out, the book, that is not the object, come out. And I remember reading it and just thinking about the journey I wanted to have in my life, and it has guided me. And so your Manifesto for a Moral Revolution is the perfect update to that conversation in my own reflection, and has continued that journey for me. And I can say much more, but I know Megan will be formally introducing you, so I will stop there and just thank you with ultimate gratitude for the role that you've played in mine and so many other, rising leaders' lives. Megan, let me turn it over to you.
Thank you, Seth. And thank you everyone for being here with us this afternoon. I will take a moment to formally introduce Jacqueline, but if you haven't already, share with us in the chat where you're joining us from. And as we progress through our conversation, as questions come to you, or if you want to go a little bit deeper into certain topics, I'll definitely do my best to monitor the chat and weave that into our conversation. My goal and our shared goal is to definitely have this be a shared dialogue. So without further ado, first of all, Jacqueline, it's so wonderful to see you on this screen and sort of be in partnership with you this afternoon. For those of you who are just meeting Jacqueline for the first time, her work began in 1986 when she quit her job on Wall Street to co-found Rwanda's first microfinance institution, Duderambere. And this experience then inspired her to write the book that Seth just mentioned, The Blue Sweater, Bridging the Gap Between Rich and Poor, and later create Acumen. 19 years later, Acumen has invested over $135 million in over 130 social enterprises across Africa, Latin America, South Asia, and the United States. And when she's not leading a global venture philanthropy, Jacqueline serves on the boards of the Aspen Institute, 60 Decibels, and on the advisory councils of the Harvard Business School Social Enterprise Initiative, the Oxford Side Global Leadership Council, and the NYU Stern Center for Business and Human Rights, and UNICEF. All of this work has not come without recognition. In addition to The Blue Sweater being a New York Times bestseller, in 2015, Fast Company named Acumen one of the world's top 10 most innovative nonprofits. And 2 years later, Forbes listed Jacqueline as one of the world's 100 greatest living business minds. And that mind published a book last year, Manifesto for a Moral Revolution, in May, actually quite a pivotal month, May 2020. Felt like the world was crumbling around us in the sort of wake of the COVID pandemic. And we were about to experience a period of extreme reckoning with respect to racial justice in the United States as well. So Jacqueline, echoing Seth, want to share that I enjoyed your book so much that I included it in my course curriculum as part of the Baumhart Scholars Capstone course. And as Seth mentioned, I've had the pleasure of working alongside your colleagues at Acumen and Acumen Academy for the past 2 years. But for those who aren't familiar with Acumen, I'm wondering if you can share just a little bit about your work and specifically the premise behind Manifesto for a Moral Revolution as we launch into our conversation.
Sure, Megan, and just thank you for that bit over the top introduction, and you too, Seth. It's just really wonderful to be with the two of you and to see that this work really is about all of us and how much we influence one another. Emily, thanks for helping to make today happen too, and great job, Susan. So thanks to everyone for being here as well. So Megan, the book really came about when my board, the honest answer is my board said a few years ago, probably 4 or 5 years ago now, it's time for you to write another book. Acumen is known for pioneering impact investing. Why don't you write about that? And I sat down and realized that a lot of people could write a technical manual on the ins and outs of impact investing. But if I was really honest, we were at a critical turning point in the world where we really did start to see that our institutions as we knew them had pretty much run their course. We needed to reimagine them. And that I was lucky enough to work with hundreds, and I dare say now over 1,000 change makers who had done just that. But the difference between those individuals who didn't just build a company or an organization, but actually went on to change systems had much less to do with the actual technical tools and everything to do with character, with a set of skills, practices, attributes that we don't teach enough in our universities, we don't teach enough in our business schools, and yet are so critical to reimagining and rebuilding a world that puts our shared humanity in the earth at the center, which is exactly where it needs to be.
And I guess so. Building off of that, you alluded. What you said is quite true. You won't find that in the curriculum of most schools, certainly not in American schools. So in the course we just wrapped up in the Baumhart Scholars Program, we met with a number of guest speakers, and as part of our conversations with them, we always ask them to reflect on the moments or the decisions in their life that most impacted their path. So if not in school, which moments in your journey were most impactful on the adoption of that sort of tenet of moral imagination, and maybe not just as a personal charter, but as a guiding strategy for how you lead Acumen Fund and your work?
Sure. I would say the first breaking open, I think I have breaking open points more than turning points, was when I was working as a banker in the mid 80s, mostly in Latin America during a financial crisis. And I was in Brazil, working inside the bank during the days and walking up into the favelas or the low income areas on the weekends, and how taken I was as a kid who had never had the money to leave the United States. When I would tell people at that time I was going to Brazil, they were like, oh, the poverty, this, that. And I found this vibrancy, this joy, this industriousness, a work ethic. And yet those very same people were not welcome into the banks. There was no place for them in the banks. And yet we were writing off hundreds of millions of dollars inside the banks that had been given to elites, often for the wrong reasons. And so that was really the beginning for me to ask the question, could we extend this incredibly powerful tool of capital to people who'd been excluded, and what would happen if you did so in ways that they actually valued and could make use of? And that sent me to Rwanda, which was by far and away the most extraordinary breaking open of my life, not only in learning that a small group of people could really build a new institution. We actually did start the first microfinance bank in the country. It still exists. I watched how you could not just change lives, but change minds. But then the genocide came. I had already left the country, but during the genocide, having to discover that my co-founders played every conceivable role, including being bystanders, being murdered, of course, but also being perpetrators. And so going back to Rwanda after the horror, and sitting in prisons, talking to people I had worked with, trusted, admired, about what happened. How did they go from building an institution of social justice to killing wantonly based on what? And so that was a time for me of really learning that, that there are no good people and bad people, monsters and angels, but monsters and angels really are our broken stuff, our broken parts, and they live inside of us. And that it's really easy in times of insecurity. And we are in one of those times right now for demagogic leaders at all levels of society to prey on those insecurities and those fears and blame other people and make us do terrible things. That was when I learned, Megan, as well, that the opposite of poverty isn't income or wealth, it's dignity. And that really led me in so many ways to starting Acumen. Although there was one other really important turning point, which I've been thinking about a lot in this last year, which is after the Rodney King riots, if you're old enough to remember, 1992 in Los Angeles, when a Black man was pulled over and beaten by the police, and it caused the city to erupt. I started a program called the Next Generation Leadership Program to create a deliberately diverse core of American leaders to try to help them learn how to talk to one another across lines of difference. And I was a pretty big failure in doing so. I don't think I had the maturity or the understanding, and at least in the first year, till I got really beaten up spiritually, not physically. But I learned a lot in that period. And so when I look at Acumen now, not only are we using the tools of capital to reach the poor in ways that promote dignity, but we also have an academy to teach so many of those critical skills that are that require us to really think about what inclusivity means. Excuse me 1 second, someone is knocking. I'm just going to see what's happening.
Zoom life, it happens.
I'm going to see if they go away. Keep going.
Sure. Take what you need to. I was on a call this morning where someone handed over the presentation to their 3-year-old because someone was also at the door. So it's just the blessings of the world that we're living in today. So Jacqueline, I want to pull a thread from something you said on the way that we are defining opposites, or the way that we're naming success. And you just shared that the opposite of poverty is not wealth, but that it's in fact dignity. And on this topic of redefining success, which is a chapter in your book, you share that there is a growing movement, especially in the social sector, and it's creeping into other sectors, to include non-financial and non-tangible measures to define success. And I'm curious if you can share just a couple of examples of the types of measurement, sort of the types of non-financial measures or non-traditional measures that you're seeing around the world that audience members here might be able to apply to their work. And I might layer in like one more thing on top of that, which is like, what role can like technology and systems play when we're talking about like non-tangible or sometimes even like non-quantifiable measures like dignity and pride and connectivity? How's Acumen, and how are you thinking about that?
So you have lots of layers in that question, but at the top level, of course, I'm a believer that narrative can drive change. And so the whole ESG movement, where there is both greenwashing, but also real, has been a real beginning of change. Although, to your point, we're much better at measuring governance and measuring the environment than we are the S, the social. So that's top line. The way Acumen measures impact and change is something that where we use technology and we call it lean data. We're really able to do it starting in 2012, where we can look at one of our companies, let's say it's a solar light and electricity company. We can text 5,000-10,000 customers simultaneously. These are individuals who might make $1, $2, $3 a day. We can ask them a series of questions from which we can then deduce not only how many more hours can they stay up, and what do they do in those hours? Are their children getting better educated? What happens with indoor air pollution? Are they healthier more days? What happens to their income? Is kerosene and pollution and carbon being displaced? And it's been a game changer for us, that mix of technology and the human living to this value of voices unheard for us and listening. It's enabled us to look across our portfolio of energy investments. And right now we're the largest off-grid solar energy investor in the world for the poor. And not only can we tell you how companies are doing comparatively based on financials, but we can also tell you which one is best for the environment, which one makes customers happiest, which one actually reaches the poorest people. And I think that has to be our future, but that requires a values shift to actually take seriously listening to the people that we're serving. And you don't see that enough in the business sector, nor in the nonprofit sector.
Yeah, I really appreciate the word listening and the way that you've leveraged technology to set up those listening mechanisms or set up those listening systems. For those of you in the audience, Acumen Academy and Acumen has a lot of resources on lean data and sort of metrics and types of questions and ways that you could do this in your own work. So do be sure to check that out. I've personally used it in a lot of the enterprises that I support too. So I want to switch the conversation to something that you referenced earlier, which is we are in a, it seems like we're persistently these days in a really powerful moment, especially over the past 12 months. Two pandemics have reared their heads, that of COVID-19 and that of a centuries-long pandemic of racism. And these two events have deeply exposed gaps in our markets and in our systems. And you see and read and hear many individuals blaming our politics or blaming capitalism, kind of in these really broad brushes. In your book, you do offer strategies for standing up against systems of inequity, and you share stories of bravery and courage where individuals were able to use your words, harness the power of these markets, but not be seduced by them. And my question is, as you look around, I'm going to speak specifically about the US today, what entry points in sort of this moment in the United States do you see to leverage the power of markets to align our existing systems, but also stand with those who are most impacted by these pandemics?
Yeah, it's a great question, Megan. And it's been extraordinary to have Acumen America as a laboratory for us. Acumen America has about 30 companies, 60% of our entrepreneurs are people of color, and I think 50% are women, but I might be off by a few points on that one. And not only were they doing remarkable things to break open new systems, but in this past year, I think we've all gotten more unapologetic and courageous, because 10 years ago, when I would talk about what Acumen does, the business community sometimes, or not the community, individuals within would sometimes say, it's so inspiring what you do, but it'll never grow, it'll never work. And now we realize we need a new approach. I think it's the business sector, the nonprofit sector, and government where we often make mistakes is that we either think of ourselves in a single silo. I'm a nonprofit and I don't trust business, or vice versa. Or we think that opportunity is enough, access is enough. And what this new generation of entrepreneurs is recognizing is that you can build a company in ways that include people, but only if you also build the capability of individuals who have been excluded from the system for too long. And so one example in the United States is a company called Everytable. It was started by another Wall Streeter who actually started in Los Angeles because he was obsessed with food deserts. And his first play was a nonprofit to teach women in the community in Compton how to access healthier food. And then he realized there was no healthier food within the community. And so he built Everytable as a fast, nutritious, affordable restaurant. It was so valued by the community and employed people in Compton that it grew to 8 restaurants. On the first day of lockdown, when everybody was pulling in, he did the counterintuitive and not only promised to deliver food if people needed it in their homes, but he said, if you can't afford it, let us know. And if you're willing to pay it forward, here's a link. And so philanthropy started coming through crowdfunding. And that then came to the attention of government. They partnered with government. Along the way, as they were now growing, when most businesses were retracting, he built an academy so that he could enable high-level employees to get trained in owning a franchise. with a real focus on Black and Brown employees. He also ensured that people would be paid $40,000 a year. They wouldn't have to put up their own capital. He raised money so that he could then on-lend to individuals. And over a 7 to 10 year period, as they paid off their debt, so would they own the franchises. Our hope is that in the next 3 years, they'll have 40 franchises coming from individuals, employees of every table, who are not just earning more income, which is what we look at too often, but they are generating wealth, owning wealth, participating in the economy, and creating jobs. That's the kind of thinking that we need, but it isn't linear. It is around partnering, and it is around more vision, quite frankly, around the tools that we have that we need to learn how to use by focusing first and foremost on the problem that we're trying to solve.
Yeah, and really letting that problem be the North Star versus the bottom line
or the tool
or the mechanics of the business model, or the product, right? So in that story that you just shared, and I really admire the way that Every Table has grown and withstood extreme uncertainty in this past year. And you've mentioned this word a few times already, and certainly within that story is the theme of courage. And in your book, almost every story that you share, including stories from your own life, present examples of courage. And you talk about how courage and resilience are not just things that you have or don't have, but that they have to be practiced. And this was one of my questions, but I saw it in the chat too, a question from Brianna. I don't want to pronounce your last name, Rismus. Hope I pronounced that right, but a question from Brianna. I'm curious, what are some of the habits that you see in individuals and in those leaders that you work with and invest in, who are kind of on this journey to practicing courage? And what little nuggets or what little habits or small changes might those in the audience take to incorporate into their own practice of courage, kind of doing the hard thing? I think I can't imagine the founder of Every Table looking down the face of a pandemic and declining revenues and saying, we're still going to put food out the door. And
we're going to give it away.
And we're going to figure it out. And we're going to make sure that it works. So much uncertainty, so much risk, so much unknown. He had to have a foundation of courage. But I'm sure some habits got him there along the way. So what have you noticed?
Well, I see in the chat any Brene Brown book. I agree. Courage and vulnerability. Yeah. I do think that not only are we not born courageous, although sometimes I meet young people and I think, well, this might be an outlier, but I certainly wasn't. I think we also have a misnomer in that we think of courage in blanket terms, rather than recognizing that it's more like a muscle. And all of us have courage in some areas and we lack courage in others. For me, it was voice. For whatever reason, growing up in an immigrant Catholic military, big family, saying things out loud was hard. And so just practicing that. And I see it. I had an assistant who was brilliant, but when in a meeting, particularly with people from many different rankings, he would never say a word. And finally, I was like, you have to ask a question. I don't care what the question is at the next meeting, but just try. Even if your lips are trembling, just try. And then we go through a couple of meetings, no question. And finally, I was like, all right, I'm going to fire you if you don't ask a question. And now when I watch him run major workshops in the work that he does, I think, partially it comes from that practice. Having done a lot of my early professional life in Kenya, in East Africa, where most meetings are started with a prayer or a song, they would often turn to the youngest person in the room and ask that child to start the session off. And it always really struck me that we don't do that enough with our children.
I love that.
I love it. Well, I make all my nieces and nephews do it now. So it's in those simple ways. It's not get on the stage in front of 800 people and make a keynote. You don't go from 0 to 100, but a lot of it is about saying truths out loud that are uncomfortable and then waking up the next morning and know you're still up there. And I do believe that confidence makes us more courageous, gives us more skills, puts us in new situations. And now, as in this past year, when many of us have had to meet it in ways that we never knew, those of us who've practiced it for a very long time, I think, have been readier. So that's what I would say about courage. Resilience is different. I do think that there are real practices that are psychologically, scientifically understood about what it takes to become more resilient. And Angela Duckworth's book, Grit, is really terrific in that way. But things as simple as, make your bed, know that you have some order, and recognizing that there are days when just getting out of bed is itself an act of courage, and honoring that. Serving other people, it turns out, builds resilience. Focusing on what you can do, not what you can't do, builds resilience. I would add from personal experience, some kind of a spiritual or reflective practice, whether it's reading poetry in the morning or going on a walk or some way of quieting yourself for contemplation to remember why you're doing the work in the first place. Martin Luther King talked about the beautiful struggle, and the older I get, the more I wonder, is that what he was talking about, that this work is hard, and it can be 30 years hard, it could be a lifetime hard, but to enable you to go back to that touchstone of your North Star, to find those moments of seeing beauty, and reminding yourself of why you are doing it and with whom you are doing it, I believe also adds a real sense of, and a sense of resilience that keeps you going through the hard times and allows you to laugh a lot easier in the good times.
Yeah, and I think I always think back to that too, like community for me has always been a source of courage and resilience, and just seeing, the 90 or 100 or so odd people on this call is reminding me, like, yeah, there's a tribe here.
I'm not alone.
I'm not alone. I'm not crazy. There's other people who are really interested in this work and interested in leading this work, not just in Chicago, but around the world. So a term that you reference often, and I've heard you, I've heard colleagues of yours at Acumen parrot this down, even to me, is this term accompaniment. And it's a Jesuit term, which is special to Loyola being a Jesuit institution. But I'm curious how you think about the difference between accompaniment and empathy. So we use empathy a lot in social innovation and human-centered design, and but you mentioned that it's different than accompaniment. So I'm wondering if you can share that difference with our audience today, and how we can use those two tools or use those two frameworks in parallel.
Sure. Empathy is obviously important, putting yourself in another's shoes. But if we stop at empathy, in many ways, we reinforce the status quo. I see you, I hurt for you, I want to know you, done. Accompaniment is more akin as a practice of what I would call the moral imagination. And moral imagination starts with empathy and then moves to immersion, proximity, getting close to a problem, understanding from a person's own perspective what gets in their way, and also starting to analyze the systems that get in their way too, as well as where they might be holding themselves back. That requires that building of trust and then taking action. Accompaniment comes in from the proximity moment to the action moment. And it goes back to what I was talking about with capability building. As most Jesuit and Loyola students probably know, that the term, the Jesuit term, essentially means to hold a mirror up, to walk alongside. I will take your problem as my own, but I will not solve it. You have to solve it yourself, but I will help you build the muscles to do so. And it's an incredibly powerful tool. When Acumen first fancied ourselves a social venture capital investor, we looked much more traditional, and we had a post-investment team that would really monitor and work with companies to try to provide management assistance. And we realized that we were working with entrepreneurs in completely broken markets, sometimes where they had to build the market that had never existed. And they needed a different kind of post investment support. They needed accompaniment. They needed us to be part of the solution, to essentially invest more than we extract as part of the deal. And that's changed everything, where we will walk besides. It builds trust, it builds that kind of capability. In the book, I talk about community health workers, which I've seen now in the United States, where you can hire someone from the community, from classic retail. They may have worked in fast food, no health experience, but train them in the rudiments, taking meds, taking somebody's vital signs, being able to call them up and saying, how you doing today? Hiring a team like that, training them in the rudiments within community to serve their community members has wildly reduced the costs of hospital care, because people are going to the hospital less, drastically increased patients' health, and provided a revenue stream to organizations and companies that are providing this kind of service. And I can see the accompaniment model combined with entrepreneurship in the United States help us solve a lot of our problems, not just chronic health and disease, but also the opioid crisis, criminal justice. Just imagine, rather than giving people $5 and a Metro card and sending them on their way after X number of years in prison, meeting them, holding them, essentially, ensuring that there's someone to help reintroduce into society in ways that are building capabilities and enabling people to get to that next step. Again, they have to do the work themselves, but we could do so much better if we were accompanying each other.
And how are you seeing that operationalized, maybe in your fund, and then also within the companies that you invest in? How does an organization build that as a practice?
The organization literally builds it into the operations, which is what we've had to do at Acumen as well. With City Health Works based in Harlem, that is the business model. We hire people without healthcare experience. We train them ourselves. They then will work with community workers, but the employees are the accompaniers, if you will. And what happens is, of course, the community members start accompanying the accompaniers, and vice versa. And the accompaniers not only gain more confidence, but what they'll say to me is, I'm part of solving the problems of my community. And by the way, my family and I are a lot healthier too. And so it's not a nice to have. It's not, in your spare time, will you do this? Although it's something we can all do much more intentionally. And that's where the developing the skills of listening, et cetera, it's building an employee base whose very job is to accompany the customers or patients or students in such a way that you truly are empowering them. And that requires a level of empathy. So does it require a real love, the toughness and the softness that comes from really taking seriously another human being's flourishing. And that all of us can do.
Yeah, I really love it's not quite a paradigm shift, but kind of just thinking about if customer success as a function in a company were renamed as customer accompaniment, or as we think about customer service, right? Reshaping it as that. A good mentor of mine once shared the mantra, people in places will show you what they have and what they need. And I think about that often, like I am a conduit. Like I am not here with the thing. And so I really appreciate you bringing that to life in that example, and then also sharing how the fund has operationalized that as a habit
Well,
too.
and Megan, what's important too is because sometimes people will hear it, in particular if I use words like love, which I do, then
Mhm.
they'll say, "Oh, but it's soft." Well, that's why you have to be a nonprofit. It's like, no, 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 no.
Yeah.
One, it's really hard to do, but two, it is the path to long-term profitability in ways that are inclusive. And there aren't a lot of short-term paths. That's the mindset shift.
Yeah.
But this is the path to profitability and to real change in ways that matter. And so I was just with metaphysically with our chocolate company in Colombia, where the entrepreneur and he's Colombian, descended from Spaniards. His partner is Japanese, and they somehow transcended all these lines of difference to work with the Arhuaco indigenous group. I write about it in the book. And I've accompanied them to build their capabilities, so much so that Hernan, one of the younger members of the Arhuacos, flew to Tokyo to receive the world's best small batch chocolate award.
Wow.
And was the one who insisted on being on the stage. He's learned Spanish because he felt that they were not only exporting chocolate from Colombia in terms of changing Colombia's identity, but that this chocolate was exporting the Arhuaco cosmology or philosophy of what the world needs now. That is empathy that's turned into empowerment.
Yeah. I mean, it's virtuous and generative, right? I think when we look across at the human sitting opposite us and see them for their experience and their knowledge and their humanness, like I can't imagine that being anything but generative and productive in creating long-term value. And I'm totally going to borrow that term you just shared. Instead of saying I was virtually with someone, I'm going to say that I was metaphysically with them. I really like that. No, I'm serious. I'm going to use that. So we're going to break into small group discussions in a few moments here. And my last question for you is around advice for just starting. So it's your opening chapter in the book, and you describe this book as we'll bring the word up again, as a love letter to the next generation. And your call to action is to just start. So for those questioning, where do I start? What advice or guidance do you have for helping them navigate that entry point?
In a way, it's a similar theme, rather than starting with what is my purpose, where will I do best, is particularly at this moment in history, is to look around and see a problem that's just an opportunity that's been disguised and needs to be solved. Which one makes you feel energized? I often ask people who come to Acumen for jobs, what are you doing when you feel most beautiful? And what the Jesuits again say is, go to where your deepest desire meets the world's greatest need. Mm-hmm. So start outside yourself. Is there a problem that you want to be part of solving? Take a step toward it. It could be a very small step. It could be an organization that might be working in it. It could be, I want to start something myself. But don't take on the whole thing. And that first step that you will take will teach you, even if you fail. It'll teach you where to take the next step and the next step and the next step. I often say that purpose doesn't find people who are sitting at the starting blocks. And that it's such a false conceit to think that we will seek and find our purpose in a linear way, but rather we live into our purpose. And I use the mantra of just start. Even now, Acumen turns 21. We'll be celebrating, since it was too hard to celebrate during the pandemic.
Yeah.
And And I'm looking at a 10-year strategy, and it is all based on, okay, time to renew. How do we let go of what doesn't serve and bring it forward and take on what needs to be done in ways that are just starting? And hopefully we'll have the courage and the moral imagination to do that. But I don't think it's just when you're young and starting out. I think just start is a mantra for every phase of our lives.
Well, we're going to do just that in a moment here when we break into small group discussions. But Jacqueline, on behalf of myself, Seth, and Emily, everyone here, and the Baumhart Center, thank you so much for this conversation and sharing the afternoon with us, and really bringing the book and your passion to life. It comes through even metaphysically.
Well, and if I could, Megan, just say to everyone here that I just wish you all the luck in the world, because we really need you no matter what your aspirations are. The fact that you're having these conversations is another way of just starting. And Megan, it's so great to be in conversation with you and Seth and with all of you. And I wish I were with you in the future, but just thank you for the privilege.
Well, thank you both. This was an amazing conversation, and I remain so grateful to be in your orbit, Jacqueline, and I'm so inspired that you are part of our faculty, Megan. And I want to just put one more time in the chat the small group, so you can, and I know people have already begun clicking into them, click into the number in your confirmation note, and there you can go further into dialogue on the Manifesto for a Moral Revolution and the many other insights that have come out in this conversation. We'll have a Baumhart Scholar there ready to facilitate your conversations. This concludes our afternoon today, and we look forward to seeing you on Monday as we begin our coffee chats. Thank you again, Jacqueline, and thank you, Megan. And I hope everyone enjoys the rest of your day. I'll leave this room open, but everyone is class dismissed, so to speak, just so if people want, they can continue to click on the rightful link for their room. Or you can find it in our VFairs app with your avatar and gamified conference experience, which I'm still marveling at as someone who is catching up to my own kids in that regard. All right, thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye, Seth. Bye, Emily. Bye, Jacqueline. Thank you.
You did a phenomenal job, Megan, and thank you, Jacqueline. That was an amazing conversation.
Thank you. Well, I was just following Megan, so thank you so much.
Accompanying.
Accompanying each other.
Yeah, and for paths cross soon. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.